Good afternoon and welcome to the second instalment of the At Home with ERM and KJA webinar series. My name is Oliver Moore and I'm a partner at ERM. The current global climate under COVID-19 restrictions is challenging us to move swiftly and adapt even faster. To support you and your organisation to continue to move forward, maintain delivery and even innovate during these times, we've curated a set of topics in this webinar series that we hope will spark thought, insight and learning. We look forward to you joining each of our webinars over the coming weeks. We'll have details on those at the end of this session, and invitations for registration will be sent out shortly after this afternoon. This second webinar, Managing EHS Compliance During COVID-19 Restrictions, is presented by Robert Smith, Jane Barnett and Ian Batterley. Robert is a Principal EHS Consultant with ERM's Operational Performance Team. Jane is a partner leading the air quality and noise practice in New South Wales, and Ian is a principal consultant in ERM's contaminated site team. Together, they bring considerable experience and insight to management of EHS compliance during challenging times. Before we hand over to our presenters, our facilitator for today, Raquel Boyd, will take us through how to use the GoToWebinar platform. Thanks, Raquel.
Thank you, Ollie. So look, on the screen now, everyone, you should be able to see an illustration of the control panel that is available to you in some form of these icons that you can see on the right. Rob, if we can click through, I'll just highlight a few of the important things here for you. Firstly, it's important to note that all participants are automatically muted. We can unmute you centrally, and we will do so toward the end of the session when we have an opportunity for question, answer, and discussion, and we'll use the hands up function, which is the icon there with the hand. So at the time, when we get to that section, I'll ask you to raise your hand. You can click on that icon and we'll be able to come and unmute you so that you can speak. Throughout the session, though, you are able to submit a question by typing where you click on that question mark icon. And through the session, if we can answer your question, we will. But if not, we will actually go to those questions, those written questions, again at the end of the session. I would also like to point out to everyone that today's session is being recorded and we'll be making these available for yourself and people who have been unable to join us today so that they can then view this webinar in their own time. Thanks, Rob, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Raquel and Ollie. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. As Ollie's touched upon already, we've all been directly or indirectly impacted by this pandemic we're living through. The traditional compliance tools we've historically relied upon are no longer available to us under the present government health advice. So we're forced to adapt and to continue to, continue to make a difference in this space. And in our opinion, it's an imperative that we do act. Our clients' business objectives have not changed. Duty of care to protect the environment and workers, as well as statutory obligations under planning consents and licenses remain. And inaction at this time opens us all up to potential risk. So our objectives today are to provide you with an overview of what we have heard from the regulators in Australia regarding COVID-19 compliance. We'd like to take you through the case for our clients continuing to drive compliance through COVID using innovation and flexibility. And finally, we'd like to run you through some of the tools that does not need to occur during a short wind risk. And most of all, we want to provide a compelling narrative to both you and your workers and the regulators that you're doing your best under these unprecedented circumstances. So, context. We've contacted several of the key environmental regulators to discuss ongoing projects that we have clients with. And the feedback we've received to date is that there'll be no free passes when it comes to compliance. Although mitigating factors will be taken into account, industry is still expected to do everything practicable to comply with its obligations under planning consents, licenses, and to meet its duty of care obligations. And this messaging has been consistent across all the regulators we've spoken to. Businesses are expected to update their business continuity plans and emergency response plans accordingly. Where no band-aid can be applied, exemptions, variations, or emergency approvals must be sought early. The feedback we're receiving so far, however, is that the various departments are willing to be flexible in approaches to achieving compliance. And as long as any variation to typical monitoring or audit processes are agreed prior to the event, innovations have and will be accepted. We've already had several unattended audits approved in Queensland and in principle in New South Wales. And the consistent feedback is the regulators want upfront and open communication on this matter. So, moving to our first of the online polls, I'd like to ask the group a question. Has your business undertaken a review of whether there have been any impacts to your ability to manage EHS compliance obligations during this COVID-19 pandemic? And has it updated business continuity plans and emergency plans accordingly? So you should see a poll coming up on your screen in front of you. Remember, this is completely anonymous. There's no judgment here. We're just interested to understand where industry is at this time. So I will give you all a few moments to make your choice. And Raquel, do you want to just give us some feedback when it looks like we've had a few answers?
Yes, indeed. We've got a few answers coming through. There's quite a bit of variety in there. I'm just going to give it another probably 10 or 15 seconds so that if you are on the call and you don't have the go-to screen at the top of your desktop, you may not have seen the poll come through, but you're able to click on one of the 5 options that we have there available for you to choose. So I'm just going to give it another few moments and then I'll close the poll and we'll be able to have a look at the results. Okay, so I'm going to share those results now, Rob.
Okay.
There we are. Can you see those now? We have 29% who've indicated gap analysis complete and plans updated. We have 57% who've indicated that the gap analysis is in progress. And we have 14% who've indicated that they're thinking about it.
Well, look, that's not a surprising result. I think priorities have been focused quite rightly on worker safety up to this point. And hopefully some of the tools that we discuss in this webinar should help the small proportion of you who haven't gotten started to understand how you can continue to manage risks during this very challenging time. So moving on, I'd like now to talk about the case for acting now and acting early. The graph up on screen plots the impact of businesses during the different phases of a crisis, in this case, COVID-19. The solid line plots the path of a business that just runs with the crisis, doesn't particularly act, whilst the dotted line represents a business that is agile, acts early, and is able to open up opportunity access during the recovery and growth period. But before we get into the case for action in any more detail, I wanted to ask the group again, where do you think your business is on this curve? Is it the accelerating response, transition, new normal, or the growth period? And again, you should see a poll come up on your screen.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, everyone, you should see that poll there on your screen. So if you take a look, and as Rob's indicated, there's some 4 options there. Click on the one that you feel most represents where you're at. Ooh, for a moment there, we had a perfect 3-way tie, but it's starting to move through. Again, I'll give it about another 10 seconds for everyone just to have a consideration of where they feel they're at and to mark that on the poll. All right, Rob, I think I'm going to close that now. We have most of our people have put their vote into the poll, so I'm going to close that.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm going to share those results. So what we should be able to see on the screen now is we can see that we have 11% of people have indicated that they're at the accelerate and response stage. 67% have indicated they're in transition. 22% have indicated that they're moving to the new normal, and we don't have anyone as yet who feels that they're into that growth phase.
Okay, well, good, because that was the guess we made as well. Certainly, we feel that at the moment, the majority of our clients are in that transitionary period. The crisis seems to have passed, and now we're at the point where we need to decide how we're going to act to get into the new normal. So, what are the dangers of inaction at this time? There's an unfortunate reality that when the auditor's away, the workers will play, and protecting the environment and workers does not seem to be a natural behavior when businesses are under stress. We saw this clearly during the GFC. During the respond and manage phases of that crisis, we frequently saw our clients deprioritize environmental management, leading to a lower standard of environmental performance being embedded in their business. And this hung around for many subsequent years. It's likely that some form of travel restrictions and social distancing will continue to remain in place for many months to come. There's also the potential spectre of a second wave of cases or restrictions when restrictions are eased or when we come into winter. So, the oversight by corporate and independent auditors has and always will be a key control that drives EHS performance. Even the process of preparing for an audit on site is beneficial, acting as a prompt to update systems and procedures and getting workers to walk the site with an auditor's mindset. But we can't but recognize that traditional compliance tools, both through corporate compliance teams and third-party independent auditors, must now adapt to the new normal as it arises. Unlike the GFC, however, we have some exciting tools available to us which can act as a proxy to the traditional boots on the ground auditing until we enter the recovery and growth phases of this crisis. Now, for me, the real danger of inaction during this time is that a major non-compliance occurs either due to a lack of oversight, incomplete data, or something else which our clients would normally be on top of outside of this COVID era. If this leads to the inevitable question from the regulator asking, what is it you did to prevent this incident from occurring? The regulators have made it clear that they'll be willing to prosecute, and if the answer is little to nothing. But we do have an opportunity to control the narrative around compliance during COVID. Do you want to be able to say, we did the minimum and hope for the best, or we did the best we could under difficult circumstances? Now, I didn't think we'd need an online poll to answer that particular question, so I'll pop on to the next slide. So what are our options? We've established that we're not in a business as usual period. We're most likely somewhere between the respond and the manage and adapt phase of the COVID curve. So what can we do? How do we act? And I think what we do is we do what we've done in previous crises. We adapt, we innovate, we're agile, and we act early to head off pain down the line and create opportunity. My team have done some soul searching, thinking about how we could support our clients through this crisis, and we realized that we have the tools and expertise available to us already. By leveraging our service offerings such as remote sensing, drone capture, and amending our approaches to auditing and bringing these together into new products, we're able to solve many of the challenges presented during COVID without having to resort to untried or untested methodologies. We're calling this process a remote or a virtual audit. So what I'd like to do over the following slides is run you through some of the tools that we have available, and we'd be fascinated to hear from you during the Q&A regarding how effective you think these tools could be at your diverse range of businesses. First and foremost, document review and start of interviews aren't going anywhere. It's still the foundation of any decent compliance assessment. Doing this remotely shouldn't be a problem. The world has already adapted to video conferencing, and it's now a standard part of our day-to-day work. Finally, an added benefit of completing this task remotely, which we've already experienced, is that the audit timeframe can be flexible. In other words, the entire audit does not need to occur during a short window when environmental consultants happen to be on site, and we've found during remote audits that we've already completed that we actually end up talking to a wider range of stakeholders who would not necessarily have spoken to during a traditional audit timeframe. The next virtual audit tool we have in our arsenal is the use of satellite imagery, aerial photography, and other remote sensing data. We can use these approaches to provide information about site operations and to identify certain types of environmental risk or non-compliance without ever leaving the office. Through a partnership with companies such as Planet Labs, a satellite company that operates over 300 microsatellites, and other companies, ERM is able to task these satellites much like a drone to visit any location in the world and get high-resolution imagery delivered within 24 hours, cloud cover permitted. ERM also has access to other imagery such as Nearmap, which collects higher resolution data multiple times a year across large metropolitan areas. Now, this data is very useful to identify issues such as poor waste storage practices, works being undertaken outside of approved areas, large-scale oil or chemical staining spills, dust deposition, bunding, poor chemical storage practices, etc. But look, we can continue to combine our assessment with other geographical information system data as well. Things such as multispectral data, infrared data, LiDAR, and site-supplied data sets to assess other ongoing environmental risks associated with ecological impact, heritage items, construction, excavation, etc. So I thought what I'd do is I would quickly take you through an example of a fictional landfill. In the image on screen, you can see a site that's licensed to store construction waste within the blue dotted line. Now, it appears to show that something's amiss. If you look, it looks like they're storing waste outside the license area to the top left of the image. Also, the license area says their license says they need a weighbridge, and is that a weighbridge next to the main building? It's quite hard to tell from this image. So let's zoom into our Nearmap data. Yep, that definitely looks like a mixture of green waste and construction waste being stored outside the license area. And now I can see that waste bin, that's actually a waste bin, not a weighbridge. So we may have a compliance issue already. Zooming in further, once we look at the drone imagery, you can now not only see it's a waste stockpile being stored outside the license area, you can also actually see what the waste stockpile is comprised of. And what else do we have? You can see that there are tires stored on site. They're also not licensed to store those, and the tires aren't laced. That's naughty, it's a fire hazard. But how much of an issue is any of this? It's hard to tell from the air, and how much is this actually going to cost me to fix? Well, there's more fun to be had with drones. We can use drone capture to develop 3D photogrammetry. Now, photogrammetry is essentially creating a digital twin of buildings or sites or excavations by collecting multiple images from different angles and stitching these together. I've used an example of a church here, which looks a bit nicer than a waste stockpile. You can see the drone images have been processed to create a 3D model. The 3D models are quite fun to play with. Unfortunately, I couldn't insert one into the presentation successfully, not for want of trying. But you should be able to actually interact with these models through simple software like Adobe PDF, and we're finding them more and more useful. This data can be used to calculate the volume of buildings, stockpiles, excavations, which in turn can be combined with our expertise to calculate the cost to rectify issues, identify what works are being undertaken outside of permitted areas, etc. This data can also be survey accurate if required. If our clients are interested in progressive excavations, construction over time, this is well-worn technology that's available to use right now. Whilst utilizing drone capture still requires an employee to be sent to site, with adequate planning and approvals, often this employee can remain outside the site boundary or isolated in an appropriate area where social distancing can still be implemented. So, drilling down a little further, with the accessibility of live streaming devices and smartphones, we can easily be virtually present on site with the assistance of on-site personnel. The complexity of a virtual audit will depend on the risk profile of the site and how much detail is required to gain comfort that issues are understood. However, they would typically be comprised of a mixture of live streaming using a GoPro or FaceTime or other widely available technology, targeted video or photography focusing on points of interest identified during interviews, photography, etc. 360-degree photography or videos of production floors, workshops, and plant rooms. We've successfully assisted our clients using this technology for creating images of the interior of confined spaces to develop smart confined space registers. Alternatively, we can, instead of taking a targeted risk-based approach, we can also take a systematic grid-based approach to ensure the entire site is assessed as part of the virtual tour. What we've done historically is we've posted the equipment to our clients who are able to record the information. So things like 360-degree cameras and GoPros we've got ready to go. And a benefit to this approach is that all records are recorded digitally instead of in an auditor's fallible brain, which can be used for comparison purposes during the next assessment. Now, I touched on 3D photogrammetry earlier using drones. However, we've also got some great software if drones are not possible or desirable at the site. If there's a point of interest that's identified during remote sensing or interviews, we can request that a site contact takes photographs of the point of interest using a smartphone or digital camera, and then we can render that data to create a 3D model of the item. The example you can see up on screen is a stockpile of construction waste, which was developed from 39 smartphone photos and used to calculate the size of the stockpile to enable us to cost the price of disposal. You can see different 3D images of that there. Similarly, you can see an excavation here, which was created using the same method during a heritage excavation. I honestly love this software. I think it's amazing. It's really easy to use. It takes 5 minutes to train someone how to take the photographs, and we've got some fantastic examples which we can also share with the group following this presentation. Now, finally, I'd just like to say that site visits are not completely off the menu under the current restrictions. ERM's developed social distancing and travel restriction risk assessments, which enable us to continue to attend a wide range of sites. In some cases, drive-by or boundary assessments are also sufficient. And we're of course continuing to offer our monitoring services to our clients with appropriate controls in place, which Jane and Ian will be happy to discuss shortly. So, over the previous slides, we have outlined multiple lines of evidence, each of which on their own would not necessarily provide confidence that environmental issues are well understood at a site. However, when consolidated and combined, these lines of evidence add up to something that's greater than the sum of its parts. In the example on screen, what I call a fictional mine, first we would have undertaken document review, video interviews, and used these to identify potential compliance issues. Subsequently, we would have undertaken a review of recent satellite imagery to test the compliance assumptions, identify points of interest on site on a site-wide basis. And then these points of interest would be assessed further, drilling down using drone footage or by sending on-site workers to take 360-degree photographs or live streaming of operations. Using this approach, we would be able to confidently draw conclusions on on-site compliance. We've already proposed this approach to several regulators relating to certain statutory audits and received positive feedback. So just to conclude on our consolidated approach to compliance during COVID-19, you can see here a plan view of a virtual audit where we draw together multiple lines of evidence, satellite imagery, drone footage, 360-degree photographs taken by site personnel, 3D photogrammetry of a stockpile in the northeastern corner. We believe by combining the traditional desk-based approaches that we've had a great amount of success with this new innovation and technology, we can provide our clients and more importantly the regulators with confidence that everything practicable has been done during this challenging period to continue to drive compliance and environmental performance. And just before I hand over to my colleagues, Jane and Ian, I wanted to quickly note that we see this approach as being something that would be bespoke for each site, business or activity. For example, at an oil and gas site, it may not be practical to fly a drone through the site due to explosive atmospheres risk. However, real value can be gained from utilizing other remote virtual audit options. Similarly, it may not be necessary to utilize drone footage at a facility whose main activities are inside, but live streaming of operations may be very valuable. We see this more like a menu of options which can be tailored to suit the needs of each site. So now I would like to pass over to Jane, who will provide an update regarding how we're supporting our clients with air and noise monitoring during COVID-19. Jane?
Thanks, Rob. And thanks everyone for joining us. hopefully I've unmuted myself and you can hear me properly. So today I'm just going to run through a few recent examples of how we've been able to help clients out during this period. I'll show you a couple of examples of other things we've also done remotely over the years. So as you'll appreciate, setting up monitoring equipment can be labour intensive, and the business as usual approach doesn't often allow for things such as social distancing or difficulties with travel, in particular across state lines. So nothing I'm about to show you is particularly new. The technology has always been there, but this COVID period has allowed us to find new ways of using it. In fact, this is an excellent time to be leveraging existing technology to solve problems. So I'll discuss the 3 areas of interest. So guiding our clients remotely when we're restricted by movement, particularly interstate. Short to medium term monitoring campaigns where we can set up equipment, leave it to run for the duration of the campaign and then come back to collect it. Or longer term campaigns for high-end, high-tech equipment that remains in place for extended periods, for which data can be remotely accessed in real time. Next slide, Rob. So these are just some images of some recent examples. So we had an urgent request from some remote monitoring in South Australia. We had staff from Sydney ready to go, flying and then driving to site with the equipment. Then COVID hit and the restrictions to travel were not able to get us to site. We arranged with the client to send our equipment to them, and then with the aid of video and phone guidance, we're able to get them to set it up. The pictures on the left show that. This was for noise monitoring. When doing this, it's really important to ensure the client has the time to dedicate to this, as even though it's fairly basic, the correct sighting is important and weather conditions are critical. You can also see from the, I'll go back, Rob, you can see from the photos that some instruments run purely on internal batteries, some from solar power. There are some vibration instruments on the right. Also, these can be hooked up to telemetry, so we can log data to the web. Most of the instruments can upload their data to the web, which can be accessed by both us and the client. This can save clients money in the long run. So next slide, Rob. I mentioned the high-end instrumentation, which is fairly high-tech. This is an example of the setup in Sydney, which was installed for a large infrastructure project. So you can see they're semi-permanent structures which require advanced setup, but once they're installed, they require very minimal human interaction and data is interrogated remotely. There are a number of web-based software packages. This is just one example we have for a setup at White Bay on the right. It measures sulfur dioxide and fine particles continuously, and the software is web-based and allows the client to log in whenever they want to. They can understand what the current concentrations are and where that local meteorology is taking the specific pollutants. So they're excellent management tools. Yep. This is the same thing, but a slightly more portable option on the back of a trailer. This is set up in the Port of Eden. This trailer allows us to literally drive in and drive out. The equipment remains in place for the duration of the monitoring campaign, and then the data is accessible in real time. So these are just a few examples of what we're doing with existing tech, trying to help our clients continue to do the monitoring they're required to do in a cost-effective way, but with as little contact as possible with people. So now I'll hand over to Ian.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks all for coming as well. Appreciate your time. Rob, do you want to skip forward? So as Rob and Jane have both touched on, there's a number of options to undertake site works remotely, but when you actually need, I guess, to collect some physical samples, and there's a few reasons you would need to do that at the moment. So there's a range of sites that are regulated by the EPA or other authorities that have that require ongoing compliance assessment or monitoring, such as groundwater monitoring. There's industries that have been identified as essential services, such as the construction industry. We're still continuing to have to do remediation and validation works, undertake waste classification, and also with the changes and to the New South Wales government planning approach, where they're fast tracking some assessments. We're also being asked to support some of the planning proposals and applications through doing on-site assessment at this point in time. And there's also the requirement for ongoing assessment where previous works have identified a risk to human health, and our clients are sort of needing to further investigate to work out if there's a risk to human health or the environment. So while we are able to continue working to support our clients in those sort of areas, there are a number of extra considerations that we need to implement within our projects during this time. Firstly, there's the initial sort of health and safety planning. We need to consider, we've always considered sort of external stakeholders to projects, but there's a range of other considerations we need to have at this point, particularly considering we work in a diverse range of areas. So we can work from quiet residential streets all the way to, very busy public areas to full operational sites. And we need to be able to communicate effectively with external stakeholders to make sure that we can maintain social distancing. We need to implement, we always do, but we need to implement further fit to work requirements. So if anyone's displaying potential symptoms prior to work, and we have procedures in place where we can stop works if anyone develops any symptoms during works. There's also, on some of our sites, we've got measures where they're doing temperature readings on the way in at the beginning of each day. For remote works, we have to incorporate a range of travel considerations. We really need to avoid people flying around at the moment and crossing state borders. So we look to use local team members. So ERM's got offices scattered all around the country. So we're looking to use local team members to support projects where we can. Sometimes if there's specialist work that's required, that may mean providing those local team members some extra training prior to them going. But we are looking to utilize those local people more. If there is travel required, via vehicles, we look to, if there's 2 or more people going, we'd look for them to be taking separate cars so they don't have to travel together and they can still maintain social distancing requirements. We also work in an industry where we use a lot of equipment, and obviously using equipment comes with a range of risks of where it's been, who's been using it, coming in contact with couriers and other people who are delivering equipment to site. So in the first instance, we look to use all our sort of ERM in-house equipment rather than rental gear. And if we do need to use rental gear, we look for implementing a range of sort of hygiene procedures to make sure it's cleaned thoroughly before used. When we're actually undertaking the works, there's a number of challenges that we need to think about, particularly around maintaining social distancing. Obviously, when we're out on site, there's a lot of potential contractors and site personnel on the site as well. So we have a range of things that we implement when we're on site. In regards to site access, there's a number of controls that are being put in place across most of our sites where we're limiting site access to critical staff only. All site inductions and site meetings are held outdoors and spaced apart from each other. So you're typically having to yell across an open space to be heard, but it's better than being in a confined site shed at the moment. Sampling works is probably one of the challenges for us at the moment, particularly when we're doing drilling. So we're looking to use contractors and drillers that have got equipment that's available so they can maintain social distancing on site. So for drilling, for example, that can be the use of rigs with things like mechanical brakes. So the driller and the offsider can maintain distance from each other. And when all tools and equipment are being used on site, maintaining sort of strict hygiene requirements, so everything's cleaned between use. And finally, when we have collected those samples, considering what we do with the samples and how we're getting them to the lab, obviously we're trying to reduce the number of people that are attending site at any one time. So we're looking at ways of dropping things directly off at the labs. We're working closely with the labs to make sure that they have procedures in place where we can drop it off and reduce contact with people there as well. Yeah, so that's it. So I guess, sorry, Rob, yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks, Jane. So just to close out, I wanted to quickly talk about the applicability of this approach. So like from an applicability perspective, this works for portfolios of sites, well at construction demolition sites, mining sites, oil and gas and waste. However, there's considerable value that can be gained from continuing compliance oversight at any site using the menu of remote options that we've discussed. As for the benefits, well, what are the benefits of these remote audits? Well, assessment can continue to be completed during COVID-19 social distancing. Remote approaches can be mobilized anywhere in the world, not just in Australia. Timeframes can be flexible, and we talk to a wider group of stakeholders. Transport and travel accommodation costs are eliminated, and the impact to the subject businesses is minimized. Now, honestly, these tools I've outlined in this presentation are tools which we probably should have been using for years to drive compliance. This crisis has been the catalyst that has driven us to innovate, and it's our firm belief that the benefits of these virtual tools will extend long beyond the COVID-19 era. So just finally, in summary, regulators are not handing out free passes during COVID. Proactive approach to compliance will reduce regulatory risk. We're in a transitionary period where we're not in the new normal yet, but we have the existing tools and expertise to continue to drive EHS compliance and shape what that new normal will look like. Now is an excellent time to consider a move to telemetry-based or remote-based monitoring. Strong risk management practices mean that some monitoring investigation can continue, and oversight and compliance can continue at any site. The benefits of virtual and remote audits, as I said, I really do believe will extend past this COVID-19 period, and I'm really interested to see where this is going to go. So, look, thank you, everyone, very much for your time. I'll hand over to Raquel to facilitate the Q&A in the remaining time that we have, and I can't wait to hear your feedback.
Great, thank you, Rob. Thanks, Jane, and thank you to Ian as well. So we do have probably just under 10 minutes available to us for any questions that you have. So if you would like to ask a question of any of the presenters today, please click the hand icon on your control panel, and we'll come to you and unmute your microphone so that you can speak and ask your question, or indeed make your comment or provide some contribution or input to some of the things that Rob and the team have raised today. So while you're thinking of a question and you're looking for your hand up icon, if you would like to also write a question perhaps for follow-up, you're also welcome to do so by clicking on the question mark icon on your control panel. Rob, it looks like you did a fantastic job.
All questions answered. How about that?
All questions answered. It certainly appears so. Are there any things you'd like to hear about, Rob?
I wouldn't mind. Oh, sorry. I think we just said the same thing. I was going to say I've actually got plenty of questions I'd love to ask our clients.
Great.
I'd be interested to know if anyone can share a story of where you've already had success with your own corporate EHS function that's dealing with the travel restrictions and social distancing. You know, whether that's using technology or procedural, or we're fascinated to know what's going on in the industry at the moment. Is there any comments on that?
Again, if you have something to contribute in that regard, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel.
I suppose also, and feel free just to throw this in the chat box, you know, does the group consider that the approaches we've outlined in this could be valuable outside of the sort of COVID era? You know, to complete audits following an incident, for example, or to provide surveillance audits in between major audits which are undertaken across your business. Anything pique anyone's interest?
Okay, we do have a comment there coming from our audience. I'm going to unmute you at this point, Paul. So you should see your microphone go to green.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Raquel. Hi, Rob. How are you doing?
Hey, Paul.
It's Paul Wecky. Just more of a comment than a question, but more than happy for people to sort of pile onto that. Is that, you know, I think we're sort of in a situation where we don't really understand, or we don't really anticipate what's coming next in the COVID scenario. We think we've created a new normal, which I think is right. You know, I think we're challenging the way work is done, and there's a lot of, you know, you've touched on a few examples of where that's been really successful. I actually think some of that thinking, in this case around auditing and around site works, will stick with us post this COVID period. And there's going to be a ton of benefits attached to that for both clients and for service providers as well. And one of the biggest ones around that is, is risk and safety risk of people being on hazardous sites or people being around mobile equipment, or just basically people travelling to site. I think there's an upside around safety alone in considering some of these aspects, not to mention the fact that there's obviously significant cost savings potentially around doing this a slightly different way.
Yeah, I think you're dead right, Paul. I think when it comes to the hierarchy of control, people do tend to skip over that elimination option quite quickly because we've always done things the way that we do them. But I think what this has shown us is, sometimes if you really do have to eliminate the risk of someone being on site, you can, and the site won't trip over. So yeah, I mean, we're finding it, as you say, in the safety space, but also even we're finding it's changing the way we do due diligence. When businesses are being bought and sold, we can't get out and do the work we were doing before, but we're finding that there are options, and I think this really will change the way we do business. So, and thank you very much for your comment, and it really aligns with what we've seen internally with our own product offerings.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rob. Now we do have a question that's come through from Claire Smith. I'll read that out, and perhaps Rob or Jane or Ian may be able to reply. Have you completed any statutory audits yet using these options for clients? And do you think the regulators will adopt the same approaches for their independent environmental audits while social distancing restrictions are still in place?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, look, funnily enough, this all started from a client of ours asking about an upcoming independent environmental audit in New South Wales. So as I touched upon at the beginning, we've reached out to DES and also the Department of Planning, and DES has already approved this to complete a virtual audit of an environmental authorization, which is great news, and we'll be doing that over the coming month or two. And in principle, the New South Wales Department of Planning has also agreed that they would accept this approach, but they will only accept it on a case-by-case basis, and they would want to be very comfortable that all of the risks are going to be covered. But the feedback we've had from all of the regulators so far is they're interested. They're willing to be flexible because they want business as usual to keep going. They're not going to give anyone a free pass during this period. You're not going to be able to get out of your obligations. So we're just at the beginning of this journey, and like I said, I think that COVID-19 is going to carry on for some months or potentially even longer, and we're going to be completing those audits soon, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot through that process. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Rob. Now we do have one final question before we wrap up, and that's come through from Preston Alma. And the question is, are ERM reviewing and revising their EHS plans for active projects, or only at the request from clients?
Another fantastic question, and actually something I was talking to our safety team about just very recently. So yeah, look, we are taking a complete step back with all of our field work. All of our field work has to go onto a register, and then all field work then has to go through a separate risk assessment process. Even when at the tender stage, when we're tendering for work, we're including sections within our tender saying this is how we're going to be dealing with COVID. Look, it absolutely has changed the way that we work. We feel like we're on top of it, but at the same time, it keeps on throwing up new surprises every day. For example, doing work with Indigenous groups, we were just looking at how we can put additional controls in place for those particularly vulnerable Indigenous groups in remote areas. So it's a continuous process. We have taken a broad review of it across the business, but we're still, as all businesses are, I think, ironing out the detail.
Great, thank you, Rob. Now, Rob, if I could ask you please just to advance to our final slide, because I would like to just take a moment before we formally close to advise you of our next upcoming sessions in this webinar series. So you can see there that our next session is next week, on the 14th of May. And in that, we'll have our specialist ERM staff going through and having a chat about the planning approvals for major projects in New South Wales and Victoria. And we'll be looking at that particularly in regard to those changes that have occurred in very recent times as a result of the COVID-19 situation. The invitations for the session for next week will be coming out later on this afternoon. So please keep an eye out for that, and we would love to welcome you to that session. And if you'd like to forward that to any colleagues for them to attend, please feel free to do so. Everyone is most welcome. So thank you all very much for your attendance and participation in today's session. We've thoroughly enjoyed having you for this period of time, and we look forward to having you back again next week or to one of our other sessions following that. Please have a safe and warm afternoon and enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you all.